social distancing, closed borders, lockdowns, massive government handouts, and privacy-invading tracing apps. In times of trouble, liberal values are under pressure. How can we make sure that everybody stays safe while not giving up on these values? That's what we're going to discuss today at the Liberal Values Conference of D66 in the European Parliament and the chapter in Belgium and Luxembourg. I'm Roger Elshout, I'm your moderator, and next to me is your host of today, Anita Pannebakker. You're the chair of the chapter of D66 in Belgium and Luxembourg. How big is your chapter? How many members do you have?
Hello, everybody. I am really excited to see you all here. And indeed, we have a chapter, Belgium-Luxembourg, which has around 200 members.
200?
Yes.
Wow. Last year, you had a conference here in the Beaux-Arts in Brussels with 300 people mingling together. This year, we have to do it digital, but more than 200 people signed up. Europe is popular.
Thank you very much. Well, we are, of course, like I said, extremely excited to know that so many people are sitting in front of their screens to join this event today. And we would have loved to have you all here physically. I have to say that I have a very good memory of last year's event, and I can still evoke this image of all of our members sitting in this nice big theater room with red plush seats, all eager and enthusiastic for a big day of debates and discussions. But we are, in any case, doing what we can in the current situation, and we are very happy to be here in the headquarters, the beautiful headquarters of our liberal counterpart in Belgium, Open VLD, and we would like to thank them very much for having us here, and we hope to have a very exciting program for you.
Yeah, we are in the heart of the Brussels bubble, and we bring that to the Netherlands. How did the idea of this conference start?
Already after last year's event, which was the I Am Europe convention, we had been thinking from time to time, can we do a sequel? But there was never really a concrete idea. And then Sophie came with this idea of doing an online European conference. And we were immediately enthusiastic because we saw the opportunities of having a lot of prominent speakers and having a very good outreach because of not having the logistical issues to deal with. So Corona, even in a way, has some advantages.
Yes, and the advantage is also we don't have to bring people from the Netherlands to Brussels, but we can Brussels really into the living rooms.
Exactly.
But you said you have 200 members. You're a bigger chapter than most of your local branches.
Yes, well, actually, we have a lot of members around Brussels that work directly or indirectly for Europe. And this is also one of the big endeavors we have in our chapter, that is to bring Brussels to The Hague, which we still find difficult sometimes still to get enough attention.
Because most local branches, their main task is running the local politics.
Exactly.
But your task is to bring European politics into the party.
Well, yes, in a way. Actually, of course, the political part is run by the delegation here with the MEPs, our own MEPs. And one of the let's say, opportunities that we see for our chapter is to put our expertise in the area of Europe at the disposal of the party.
Yeah, so imagine I'm in a local branch somewhere in the Netherlands and I want to know more about the Monetary Stabilization Pact. Do you have someone who can come to us and have a discussion?
I'm pretty sure I can find you someone here in Brussels.
Basically any topic, yes.
So give us a call.
Today we have a packed program. We have a roundtable discussion, we have an interview with party leaders, we have and it all leads up to the speech of Sigrid Kaag. How important is that?
Well, of course, Sigrid is our new party leader, and we are, of course, already looking at the campaign for next year's election. So we are extremely happy that Sigrid has found the time to give a keynote speech today. And we hope, of course, to find out more about her, how she sees our European program in the weeks and months to come develop.
Yeah, and you say one of my roles is also to bring Europe into the party. I think D66, you had posters with "We Love Europe." You have a new party leader who is more working on getting a national profile, showing that she also knows domestic politics and not only international politics. Is it still needed for D66 to talk about Europe?
it is very necessary for D66 to talk about Europe, and I think it is still very difficult to find a way to always see the sort of bigger perspective, the bigger European perspective to nearly every file that we might discuss at a local level, whether it's regional, whether it's at the level of the communes, whether it's national, there is always a fourth dimension, which is Europe. And I think this is an area where we could still gain a bit in visibility, yes.
Even in a European-minded party like D66?
Even so.
Today we're not only broadcasting on YouTube, we're also having fringe meetings where people can mingle and discuss with each other on several topics. Why is that so important?
We think this is actually one of the most important parts of today's event. It is, of course, today very difficult to meet up and discuss with others. It is even very hard to meet family or friends. But for a party like us, I mean, our DNA is to debate with each other. And so we want to give this opportunity to our members, be it digitally, to meet up and to discuss the corona situation, the consequences of all of this from different angles together and to meet up.
Okay, well, during the whole program, the two of us are going to come back to guide the audience through this packed program and make sure everybody is at the right time, at the right place. And at the end of the day, you're going to come back also to announce the winner of the pub quiz.
I will, absolutely.
Maybe that's the highlight of the day.
Well, I would not think that is the most important part, but it's going to be a fun way to close off today. But before that, there is lots of exciting other events first.
Yes, so I'm going to see you a lot more today. For now, thank you so much, Anita, and I'm going to discuss with Sophie because you organize this together, and I'm going to ask her why we do this on the content-wise. Anita, thank you so much.
Thank you, Roger.
Yes, and here's your MEP, Sophie in 't Veld, leader of the Euro delegation of D66. Sophie, good afternoon. It seems so obvious. In times of trouble, liberal values are under pressure. How do you see it around in the European Parliament?
But I think we see it everywhere. I think in every country we're having the same debates. You know, what about the right to family life, to see my parents, to see my partner? What about freedom of speech, freedom of demonstration, freedom of movement? How do our parliaments and our courts still function? And I'm very pleased that today we are going to discuss these matters, not just amongst Dutch people, but with our fellow European liberals. We're very happy to have people from Italy, Hungary, France, Sweden, and of course our Flemish liberal friends. We are in their home. We're very pleased to be here. And I think it gives a feeling of warmth, in a way, to be with your political family and discuss things that concern every single European citizen.
And if I, as a citizen, sometimes watch politics on TV these days, I think the values or the politics has gone out of politics because everybody agrees, from communist to liberal, from left to right. We just have to take these measures. We don't like it, but it's necessary. Can you still have your values in politics? Can you still have them as your guiding star?
Absolutely, and I think that is what D66 is doing together with its European partners. In the European Parliament, we are in the bigger Renew Europe group together with like-minded parties. And I think, you know, you say everybody agrees. I'm not so sure. We can see that there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's also something that we share. We really don't know what measures are the right measures, and you know, if it is justified to limit our freedoms. So there is a lot of debate about that. How much is still proportional and necessary? And as it looks as if this corona crisis is going to last a lot longer than we had maybe thought initially, we have to consider very carefully how we are going to do that while securing as much as possible our way of life, because when we talk about rights and freedoms, that's basically what we mean, our way of life.
And can you give an example of where the liberals in the European Parliament have made a difference in keeping some of our liberties?
Well, I think we are absolutely the champion when it comes to the rule of law. not just relating to the corona crisis, but also if we see the rise of authoritarianism in Poland and Hungary, we see corruption in certain governments, so we have been in the forefront. But also when it comes to fighting this virus, we are the group that is watching very, very sharply, you know, does this limit our freedoms unnecessarily? Can we secure democratic scrutiny, judicial scrutiny? Can we keep the borders open? Because you see lots of governments are closing the borders. But also, and this we're going to hear also in the roundtable from my French colleague, how are we going to tackle this crisis together? You know, things like buying vaccines together, or maybe sharing hospital capacity, or developing medicine together, research. I mean, those things, that is really something that Europe should do.
And your liberal values are important to you. We have to make sure everybody is safe, so we sometimes have to sacrifice something, that's clear. How can today help in being more strict, or more finding your values again, or making better balances? What should be the outcome of today?
Well, I think it is very important and very useful that today we're going to have an exchange with people coming from other countries, because it struck me that the response to the virus is very, very national, and we see this, you know, rallying behind the flag, as they call it. And I think it is very useful to start by listening to others, like, how have you experienced it? For example, you know, my Italian colleague, Italy was the country that was hardest hit during the first wave. So how did they deal with it, and how did people feel about their rights being restricted? But, you know, when we're talking about rights, there's also the right to health, for example.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a very complex debate, and I think we need to get the understanding that this is not something national, it's something European or even universal.
Okay, well, that's what we're going to do today a lot. The opening word today will be by Egbert Lachart. Why is that so important to you?
Well, I'm extremely pleased that the party leader of Open VLD, we're in their headquarters, has accepted to do an opening speech, because just, I think, not even 2 weeks ago, in Belgium, after a very long period of time, almost a year and a half, he managed to negotiate a new coalition government, and this is it's a very exciting government with liberals, Greens, socialists, and Flemish Christian Democrats. So it's a very unusual, a very progressive, and a very liberal, and a very pro-European coalition. And despite the fact that we are in the middle of a crisis and very turbulent times, and people are insecure, this coalition, you know, there is a buzz about it, and it gives people hope, and it gives people a prospect. And so, therefore, I think that is what we as D66 also do. We try and join forces with others. We come out of our trenches. We're not just bickering with other parties. We want to work together to get results. That's what we have done in the Netherlands, and that's what the VLD under leadership of Egbert Lachart has done in Belgium.
Before we're going to watch him giving his remarks, we have to go to Paris last night, because something horribly happened. We almost forget that not only Corona is threatening our liberties, but there are other threats. How relevant is this also for our discussions today?
Yeah. Well, I feel it's very relevant, because we were all shocked yesterday evening by the news of really a gruesome terrorist attack that hit France once again. And I think it adds also to the feeling of insecurity that people have. They don't know, you know, we have Corona, we have terrorism, we have climate change, we have a lot of instability in the United States. People don't know what's happening anymore. And I hope that after today, people are coming away with a sense of hope. The fact that we Europeans, you know, we stick together. And if we stick together, we have already proven in the last half century that we can move mountains. So I hope that at the end of this day, people feel excited, they feel energized, inspired, but they certainly also feel we are not alone in this. We are together, and we're going to fight this crisis, and we'll come out stronger.
Wow, that's a really good start of this conference. I hope at the end of the day we're going to see you back and see if all your expectations came true. For now, let's hear it from Egbert Lachart.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you at our party headquarters of Open VLD in Brussels. Our two parties have always maintained a warm relationship, and a close collaboration. And it is an honor for me to be invited here as speaker today. As you all know, our country Belgium has been in a political turmoil since December 2018. At that point, the Flemish Nationalist Party N-VA left the centre-right cabinet because of the UN Migration Pact, with only one consequence. The elections in 2019, in May 2019, were won by the extreme right party Vlaams Belang. And it took over a year to form a new federal government, which was installed only at the beginning of this month. Nationalists in Flanders will probably say it proves that this country is broken, that it cannot be fixed. But we all know that this Belgian situation is not that particular any longer. Everywhere in Europe, the confidence in politics is plummeting. Everywhere in Europe, extremist parties are on the rise. Everywhere in Europe, traditional parties lose votes. And everywhere in Europe, it becomes more difficult and it takes more time to form a coalition government. It is a sign of times and a challenge that we must face together. Regaining trust in the democracy, in the political system, can only be done by governing properly, by tackling the real problems of our citizens together. And this is exactly what our new Belgian government must and will do in the coming 4 years. Luckily, there is a new liberal prime minister in our country in charge, our own Alexander De Croo. And he leads the first gender equal government in our country, and it's also a very diverse government as well. After more than a year of absolute standstill and quarreling, his government will do politics in a new way, in a positive way. And I'll admit, I know from experience, it was not easy to make this deal between liberals, Greens, socialists and Christian Democrats about the economy, the environment, taxes, migration. It was a difficult exercise, I can tell you. But we managed to leave our differences behind and focus on the policies that bind us together. That is what politics is about. It's about knowing what you stand for, but on the other hand, making compromises, meet each other halfway and move on in the best interest of your country and its citizens. Citizens do not expect us to quarrel all day long and show how liberal we are. They expect solutions from us for their daily life problems. It won't be an easy ride, that's for sure. These are extraordinary times. 1 year ago, nobody expected a global pandemic hurting our health and crushing our economies. The coronavirus is putting our liberal democracies and freedoms under enormous stress as well. Who would have thought that we ever had to install again a lockdown, a ban on non-essential movements, close the Schengen borders again and impose a curfew or a night clock? All for the good cause, of course, but sometimes legally and ideologically questionable. Governments also have to navigate blindly, counting on the advice of specialists. During the terrorist attacks in 2015-2016, lots of voices were screaming for far-reaching measures, hurting our fundamental freedoms. We resisted that fiercely and with success. But this invisible enemy, the tiny virus, had a larger impact on those freedoms, often with thorough debate. There is one upside. The lockdown made everybody realize how precious and self-evident we thought our freedom was. We must keep on debating about the importance of liberal values, freedom, principles as freedom of movement, privacy, etc. This is an opportunity and a mission for all liberal parties, such as ours. This conference is a great example. My liberal friends, dealing with the coronavirus is not our only challenge. It just got added to the top of the pile. Restart our economies, make them more digital and sustainable, restoring faith in justice, fight climate change, control migration flows, strengthen democracy again. These are all challenges we all face in Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, everywhere. Therefore, they are European challenges. European states are too small in this world, dominated by superpowers as China, Russia and US, to tackle these problems on their own. We are too intertwined in this globalized world with internet and free trade not to work together. Our interests are too similar. We Europeans must collaborate. We must pool sovereignty to regain it. We are stronger together. But, and this is important, but just as in Belgium, Europe needs to rebuild the trust of the people in its institutions. Europe is too far off, too bureaucratic, too undemocratic for too many people. I dare to say that Europe is the most important level of government. At least it has an enormous impact on our daily lives. But we need to close the gap with the average EU citizen. And that of course starts with talking about Europe and defending its policies. This, my friends, is another mission for pro-European liberal parties as D66 and Open VLD. I would like to thank you again for the invitation to speak. I wish you all a very fruitful conference and of course an election victory in March 2021. Good luck.
Yeah, Anita, and how great is it that we can be in this magnificent building?
Yes, isn't it fabulous? It was said before, we are here in the headquarters of the Liberal Party in Belgium, Open VLD. And I could not support more the words of Egbert Lachert on how important it is to collaborate and to work together.
Yeah, now, are you sometimes jealous of how self-evident Europe is in Belgium? Whereas sometimes in Holland we have to explain how important it is and how relevant.
Well, I wouldn't say jealous, and I am not entirely convinced that it is much better in Belgium. I think we have to work very hard at all levels to indeed close this gap between the European institutions and the EU and the citizens. And here we have a lot of, how to say, progress to make.
Yeah, well, okay, well, let's turn to someone who is doing that, definitely. It's our man in The Hague, Rob Jetten. Can we get Rob on the screen? Hi, Rob, good afternoon. I think the first time we talked was 5 years ago when you were a candidate for the parliament here in Brussels about European topics. Has Europe been as important to you ever since?
Oh, it's even more important these days because I strongly believe that we should fight this corona crisis together. We've seen a lot of national reflexes in the first months of the pandemic, and we're still figuring out how to cooperate better amongst each other. And on the same time, we've got a new European Commission, and the Dutch Parliament is debating the Green Deal, new proposals on migration. Of course, the Netherlands has been one of the frugal force in the budget discussions. So Europe has been on top of mind for me for the past 6 months.
Yes, and beside delegation leader of D66 in the parliament, you're also the spokesperson for European affairs. Is that a coincidence?
No, not at all. I think the European approach is one of the most important values of D66. And we are stuck in a Dutch parliament with a large majority that is Eurosceptic. And for me, it's important as a group leader to take a strong stance on European cooperation and to address a lot of these topics. You know, many of our members of government, like Mark Rutte, Wopke Hoekstra, Stef Blok, they all sometimes need a little push from the pro-European forces in Parliament to do their best in Brussels.
Yes. Anita, how happy are you that Rob said yes to moderate this first roundtable?
Well, of course, I was very happy. I could not have actually imagined this event without Rob playing an important role. And I do indeed also remember this debate many years ago in Brussels, where we received Rob in summer also in the center of Brussels. And it was a very, very exciting evening as well. Yes. So indeed, very happy to welcome you here in Brussels, Rob. And I understand you and the people that you have with you, you're going to take a deep dive into different aspects of the corona crisis. Maybe you could just say a few words of what you expect of this session, and then we'll let you get on with it, of course.
Yeah, well, but we can also thank you for massaging the Europe message into Rob, because you groomed him. Rob, you have till 2 minutes till 3. Tell us who are your guests and what are you going to discuss with them?
Thank you very much, Rogier and Anita, and welcome everyone to the D66 European Congress. I'm thrilled to see that so many people are joining this live event. I'm aware that there are plenty of other activities one could do in times of lockdown and quarantine. But for example, taking a nice walk or finishing all your Netflix series. But I'm very happy to see so many liberals over here online. Perhaps it has to do with the subject we're discussing in the next half of hour, a subject we liberals deeply care about, human dignity, values, liberal values, and liberal values that sometimes seem to be banned to the background due to the actions and steps taken by governments to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Once again, welcome everyone. And for those who do not know me yet, after the introduction of Rogier and Anita, my name is Rob Jette. I'm the leader of the D66 group in the second chamber of the Dutch Parliament. And I will be the moderator for this virtual round table. We have approximately half an hour to exchange views on this theme. And it will be very challenging time-wise because we've got three very interesting panel members. Let me introduce them to you. First of all, we've got Véronique Triet-Lenoir. She's from France. She's been very active in the fight against cancer as a professor and hospital practitioner for many years, and she's now a member of the European Parliament since 2019 on behalf of La République En Marche. She's leading on the health strategy of the EU and the European response to the COVID-19 crisis. Véronique, bonjour and welcome to the panel. Our second guest is Anneleen Bredenoord. She is a professor of ethics of biomedical innovation at the University Medical Center in Utrecht. And she's also the leader of D66 in the Dutch Senate. Anneleen, welcome.
Thank you.
And joining us live from Brussels is Philippe de Backer. He's a former MEP and until very recently federal minister in Belgium for data protection, as well as member of the Corona crisis team of the Belgian government and in charge of contact tracing and developing the Corona app. Philippe, van harte welkom.
Dankjewel, dag Rob.
Anneleen, let me start with you. From your perspective, we've seen a lot of national reflexes in the fight against the Corona COVID-19 pandemic. How do you explain this national reflex and what does that mean for liberal values?
Thank you, Rob, and thank you all for this invitation. It's wonderful that we can have digital conferences like this in these times. Well, indeed, I'm also the spokesperson of healthcare in Senate, next to being the group leader. And what really strikes me in all these measures is that in first instance, all measures are very nationalistic, and also we have protectionist tendencies. If you take a look, for example, at Dutch policies for the intelligent lockdown, which is how it is referred to in the Netherlands, but we all have different names for these lockdowns. We all have different policies for whether or not to wear personal protective measures, such as a face mask. The travel advices in the European Union have many different colors, and I think it's quite difficult for citizens to understand the policies, also for me. The rules on social distancing and also on these tracing apps, they are very different. And also, for example, the tracing apps, they are not interoperable. So actually, I'm a bit concerned that in the end, all countries made their own measures. And I would like to talk about how we can coordinate and strengthen that we have a European approach to, particularly now, because it's not a sprint. It's not that we have a solution within a couple of months. This will be a marathon, maybe even for the next 2 years. So it's not too late to talk about the liberal values and European coordination.
Okay, thank you, Anneleen. Let's go to Véronique. Véronique, as a member of the European Parliament, what is your view on these national reflexes and how can we strengthen European cooperation?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. And I must say that even if I want to be positive today, you may be aware of the murder which was done yesterday against a teacher talking about freedom of expression to his students. So I really cannot avoid to mention it and to say how the support from the Renew Europe group, the liberal group of our parliament, is heartwarming to the French population. To be a little bit more positive, yes, we have faced very high health nationalisms. In fact, it is the member states' health decision makers to have the responsibility to protect their own citizens, but it is a serious cross-border threat. We cannot make a European policy with an addition of national health measures. We have to share common criteria, common screening strategies, common mapping of risk areas, and to avoid the disorganized return of border controls, threat to cross-border work, and worrying health nationalism. Because health nationalism is not only ineffective, it is dangerous. We are facing a pandemic. We have to protect ourselves to protect each other and vice versa. It is not only a question of solidarity, it is a question of medical evidence. Maybe I can go further and try and explain you how the European Parliament has faced this problem of health nationalism.
Yeah, please go ahead, Veronique.
Yes, first of all, our liberal group in the Parliament proposed a European health response mechanism to enhance coordination and solidarity, for instance, on common measures and on the management of the sanitary strategic reserve. I'm talking about medicines and medical equipment. We ask for a strengthening of the European agencies' competencies and means. And last but not least, we support the proposal from the European Commission for a BARDA, Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, to finance public-private partnerships to stimulate European research and innovation and to avoid drug shortages. Because beyond the crisis, we also have this endangerment of our populations with the drug shortages, and one country is not able to do that on its own. We need the European action. We need a critical mass of funding for research and to avoid fragmentation of national effort. This is particularly true for the vaccines, and I know that Sophie has been emphasizing on it. And last but not least, the medicine of the future is based on collection and common analysis of big data. We need to protect the rights of the citizens in terms of medical data, but we need artificial intelligence methods to be sure to make sure that these data will be used in the right way and help research and innovation independently from the big techs, which is really the main objective.
Thank you, Veronique. Let's go to a former Minister of Data Protection, Philippe de Backer. But before we go on to the data topic, Philippe, can you explain to us what's it like to govern during a pandemic like this?
It was not easy because, you know, Belgium, of course, is a very complicated country. We have a federal level, we have federated entities who all have a lot of competences and responsibilities, for example, in the first line of healthcare with the medical doctors, making sure that testing gets done, making sure that quarantines are followed up. It's all a regional responsibility in Belgium. So it was initially for us also a case of getting this coordination together within Belgium as such. But for me, I think there are three things that stand out. One is the lack of preparedness. And I think the lack of preparedness has been in every member state of the European Union, also the European Union collectively. I think that many people have warned that something like this might one day happen, but I see that in many countries this was not taken seriously, and also at the European level there was no preparedness coordination to make sure that we will be able to stand up from the first day to a pandemic like we are seeing now with COVID. So that's the first point. The second point is indeed, once the crisis started happening, you could see a lot of nationalistic reflexes. For example, when when my task force came into action end of March, we had to negotiate with Germany and France because there were masks and protective gear that was blocked in Lille in Berlin and could not come into Belgium. Vice versa, Liège was a WHO hub for many countries. So we said, look, we want to keep our airport open, but there has to be reciprocity. Then also the mask and every protective material that comes in also needs to come into Belgium. So I think this, within 1 week, countries understood that this kind of collaboration and keeping borders open in order to make sure that the fluxes could continue was essential in fighting this pandemic. And so after a week, this was resolved. And then the third issue, of course, that you also have to do further coordination. I think that the first wave of the pandemic in March and April has clearly shown that there are some aspects which we really need to coordinate at European level. I just mentioned two. One is indeed everything that has to do with travel. It cannot be that you can enter into France without taking a test, while in Belgium you should take a test and 10 days of quarantine, if it only takes you 2 hours to go from Paris into Belgium. So I think this European coordination, this clarity that is needed to the citizens is absolutely necessary. And I don't understand why at the European level this has not yet been decided. And secondly, I also think that, again, in preparing for the second wave, it was still very difficult to get countries on board. For example, to validate some types of new testing. Every country had to do this by himself. And then maybe exchange information. We had a collaboration there with the Netherlands, for example. It worked very well. But this should be really done at the European level. It would create mass, speed, much more ease of use also by sharing this kind of information across Europe, and then also making sure that every country has the ability to have this kind of testing or protective material. I think there the coordination of the European Union really should take one step higher, make sure that we do much more things together, because it increases the speed, it increases the way that we can do things together, and it will also show to the outside world that we are still a European Union which can handle this crisis together.
And in your experience over the past few months, do you believe that national governments in the different member states are now convinced that we should strengthen European coordination and cooperation on healthcare?
But I still feel that many countries are stuck in an old paradigm, and the old paradigm is that healthcare is a national responsibility. This, of course, is partly true, but the pandemic has clearly shown that it is also partly untrue, and that we need more of this European coordination. That is one, but I think that there are other measures that can be taken. And so what we try to do is really to reach out to the neighboring countries already, France, the UK even, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, to see what we can do together. For example, at a certain moment, there was an exchange of patients between the Netherlands and Belgium. We tried to help the Netherlands when it came to their testing strategy. So there was a lot of information going back and forward. On masks also, the Netherlands was a little bit quicker than we were on the FFP2 mask. We were quicker on the surgical mask, so we did an exchange of goods. So these kind of things are happening in reality, and that's a good thing. But I think that we can still take it one step higher and really coordinate this also at the European level.
Okay, thank you. Annelien, how do you explain these national reflexes? What is it? What's the main reason we're...
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I completely agree with what Philip was saying. Particularly, I think we have to make a distinction between healthcare policy and public health policy. And I think we can no longer, I think it's okay to keep the healthcare policies for the national countries. But public health is by definition not something that is something of borders. That should be on a European level. And well, I think it's difficult, it's complex to explain this. And I think it's also disappointing. I think one thing is maybe that there was really a short time frame in which the governments had to make decisions. And as we all know, it's sometimes quite difficult to make decisions with all European national governments. So that may be one thing, that there was a lack of time. But then you could think that during the weeks after March, there was more time to coordinate. So that cannot be the only explanation. And there's another thing that I think all European countries were also struggling with the role of the parliaments and how to ensure democratic scrutiny. I think, Rob, that might also be your experience. But for me, as a member of our Senate, it was sometimes it was really a search for allowing the government to have support measures and make decisions. But on the other hand, we also wanted to have our legislative role, to have democratic scrutiny, but there was no time for this. And all this, there was sometimes a limbo, I think, for national parliaments. And if it's already so difficult under such a time pressure to do it in your country, then it's even more difficult to do so on the European level. But this means that we need to be prepared for that, that we need a crisis preparedness and response approach. Because if we have to do it at the moment, then it's difficult. Yeah.
Okay, Veronique, do you agree with Annelien making the distinction between public health policies and healthcare policies?
Yes, of course, I fully do. We have this institutional inconsistency that the treaty wants to set strong ambition on the protection of human health, and on the other hand, limits the EU competencies and the member states keep the health prerogatives and most of the time want to do so. I would like to bring some kind of more positive view of the cross-border disorganization, because the European Parliament, and Sophie and I were very much engaged in this, have urged the Commission and the member states to come and work together on common criteria, common screening strategies, common colors for mapping risk areas. It is not yet fully implemented, far from it, but it has started, especially with Germany, Belgium, etc. The will of the Commission is clear to go further. And as an optimistic lady, I think that this will happen, but it's a long way because, again, you very well know, just like I do, that the national health decision makers also have to face the specificities and the culture and the wantings of their population. So it is certainly a very huge challenge, and it has started, let me tell you.
Okay, thank you for that positive point of view. Philippe, Veronique was already talking about the importance of big data to fight this pandemic, but also the importance to protect the privacy of our citizens. You have been a minister for data protection and also very involved in developing the Corona app for Belgium. Can you tell us something about well, the constant fight between digital innovation, but also protecting our privacy?
Yeah, I was at the same time the Minister for Digital Agenda and for Privacy. So it was a fight within myself that I had to know. I mean, I think that digital and data can really play a huge role. And you also see it during this pandemic. And I'm a scientist by training. I have a PhD in biotech. And so for me, when I take decisions, I need to be able to base it on data, on facts and figures. And so I think also there, our health bureau, Cienzano, has done a tremendous job in really stepping up the data collection, making sure that it was presentable, making sure that it could be used also by statisticians, modelers, to make sure that we could have a better view of what the pandemic was really causing within society. And one of the first decisions that my task force made, for example, was that we saw a huge increase in the elderly population in resting homes. So the first thing that we did when we had testing capacity, we did a screening in 2.5 weeks of all the resting homes in Belgium. And so within 2.5 weeks, we had a clear overview of what was going on in these resting homes, and we could take measures. And I think that significantly improved the situation of people living there, and also making sure that we could avoid additional people being contaminated and eventually also maybe deceased. And so the data was essential and is still essential, and we still have data gaps. For example, we don't do enough source analysis when it comes to contact tracing. We don't do enough cluster analysis. We really don't have a good idea where people get contaminated, for example. So all these data needs to be better collected and analyzed by scientists. But at the same time, from the start of the pandemic, I truly believe that data was playing a huge role. I made a little model myself in the beginning, in February, March, to see what was going on after the first contaminations in Belgium, how quickly it was rising. Quickly we brought together a team of modelers within a task force called Data Against Corona. So we allowed them to have access to this open data and to be able to predict what was going to happen in the next few days or even the next week. And so we could base policy on this. At the same time, we had, of course, also a lot of questions. Can we use telecom data? Can we use and develop a Corona app? What about privacy? And so the moment that the task force of data against Corona was started, I also installed next to it, within it, an ethics committee. So there were 5 specialists specialized in ethics, bioethics, to see what kind of use cases we could develop. And at the same time also have a close contact with the Data Protection Authority to see, okay, what kind of data can we use? And so based on those 2 components, the Ethics Committee and a clear collaboration with the Data Protection Authority, setting the boundaries for what we could do, we could develop use cases. And one of the first use cases, for example, was based on anonymized telco data to see if people were really respecting the lockdown at the moment. And yes, it was the case. We saw a drop with 90% of the traffic moving between neighboring neighborhoods. And so we could clearly see that people were staying at home. The Corona app was much more difficult in Belgium because, like I said, it's a complicated country. So the authority to impose quarantine and the authority to do a follow-up of contaminated patients is a regional competence in Belgium. And so we had to collaborate with the regional authorities in Brussels, in Flanders, in the Walloon region to set up a system. But for us, it was always clear, and for me, it was always clear that this should happen within a privacy-proof framework. So from the start, we made a legislative framework where we really clearly outlined in the law what were the boundaries of this contact tracing. And then, of course, Europe was quite helpful in that fact because the elements that Europe put forward, the different protocols, the privacy guarantees that should be in these kind of Corona apps, we implemented them from day one. And so we basically copy-paste within our law the recommendations of the European Union, and it really helped to reinforce the trust within the system, because if people don't trust it, they're not going to download the app. And now we have seen, we launched the app mid of September, over 1 million people, so over 10, almost 15% of the Belgian people already downloaded the app. So you see that also this kind of framework can help to install trust into the system.
Okay, thank you. Annelien, you've been the you've been the spokesperson. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
And I would like to ask Philippe a question about this. I indeed was the spokesperson in our Senate on our what we call Corona Melder app in the Netherlands. And I know that digital technology is really international. I also know, because of my profession, that academic bioethics is really international. So we have the GDPR, which gives us privacy by design principles for modeling such an app. So, and now we have 17 different tracing apps all over the European Union. Some with open source, others with technically a bit different. So I was wondering whether maybe Philip knows why the countries chose to all build their own apps rather than having 1 or 2 European apps.
Yeah, my push was clearly a European one. And so I've insisted also that the basic protocol, the DVPT, was a European one. And so I think most countries are working with their app based on that European developed model. It was first implemented in Germany, but later on also rolled out in other countries. And it's the same for us. We have an open source, clearly defined. And so the European specifications are there. I had a very difficult discussion with my French colleague because the French have opted for a completely different system, a centralized system. So one of the elements for me that was crucial, and I mean, having this history in privacy and data protection, was that the data is decentralized, and it increases the security of data tremendously. Otherwise, you store everything in one database, and then it takes one hack to have access to all this kind of very sensitive information, because we're talking about really health information here. So for me, the overall framework that the European Commission set was sufficient for us to go and build the app. I think it was the case for many countries. But of course, the top layer is often, again, something that is specific to a country. What kind of information people want, what kind of IT fluxes are going behind in order to use the app. That still is very much a national thing. And so I think you see in many of the apps that are being that are put on the market today, a combination of both, based on this European centralized protocol, but at the same time also having these tweaks, making sure that people can adapt it and use it also in the national context. Because just to give you one example, our app allows people to ask for a test and to have the test result also on the app, and in that way inform people anonymously that they have been contaminated. But of course, this needs to link up with the national IT systems in order to have this kind of, when is the sample taken, is the result positive or not? You need to tap into national resources, and I think that's the reason why you still see that the apps are different, but the core, the protocol is in many countries the same. Huh?
I think this is also the message from Veronique, that we can have European frameworks, European cooperation, but still have some national responsibility to implement it. Veronique, you've been working in French healthcare for a very long time. We are mainly focusing on fighting the COVID crisis as we speak, but do we address enough time to the structural challenges for healthcare during this pandemic and also after this pandemic?
Yes, first of all, I must admit that the decisions made by my government on the apps tracing was not the best in the world. And I agree, and I regret together with Philippe that we have a system that will never be interoperable with the other ones. Yes, we have many challenges to face beyond the crisis. I would say that the very first one would be prevention. As very well stated by Annelien, prevention, public health, health promotion are really subjects to be treated at a European level. I don't want to talk about every subject in prevention, but clearly the Green Deal is a first step because it's prevention against pollution, against chemical exposure, etc. The European plan to fight against cancer will be another strong one, because we will have to address at a European level the problem of tobacco, the problem of alcohol, the problem of vaccinations against cancer. So we will have a lot of very important subjects to face. The research, as I previously mentioned, really requires a very high level of critical mass. And the example of medical data, big data in health, is really a good one where not a given country is strong enough to do it. We are very happy to see the strong efforts of the Commission on vaccines development and joint procurements between the member states. Of course, the addressing the drug shortages, as I mentioned previously, will have to be treated at a European level, not when given country is able to relocate all the production of all drugs on its own territory. This will really have to be a networking of countries, networking of stockage, networking of relocalization. Finally, the question is really what Annelien said before, to find the limit between the national prerogatives and the European level, giving the European countries recommendations, guidelines, rules for implementation and for evaluation is not interfering with the national health systems, but it is giving a European framework. And to my opinion, the cancer plan will really be a good model to work on, because we will have to find the way to not overlap the national prerogative, but give a global strategy, a global framework to make sure that health nationalisms will not come back. I am not sure that we will succeed, but I'm absolutely sure that we will try very hardly to succeed.
Okay, thank you thank you, Veronique, and we're very happy that you are one of the fighters for this cancer policy on the European level. Annelien, you're not only a liberal politician, but also a professor of ethics. What is your view on the vaccination program and the individual liberty to choose to use the vaccine or not?
Well, I think I have two thoughts on this. I think whether or not you will have an invasive vaccine is and should always be a personal, individual decision. Sometimes we hear fears, people express fears about that there could be mandatory vaccine programs. I think that's unthinkable that this will happen in the European Union. So I think, and I also think that within my bioethics colleagues in the European Union, we have Zoom meetings like this. That is one of the good developments during this crisis, that there is more coordination also within the academic groups. Everybody agrees that it's unethical to promote mandatory vaccine programs. But of course, if people are not willing to use a vaccine, there might be recommendations for quarantine for people because they may be at risk and may be a risk for other people. So even social liberals are not promoting complete individual liberty, of course, because we live with and for each other. That's one thing. And the second thing is that there can only be an effective vaccine, indeed, if we have a European procurement program to have a fast vaccine for a reasonable price, and also to have a policy on who gets the vaccine first, because we cannot, all people in the European Union cannot have the vaccine on the same day. So that's also a matter of justice and fairness. And I think we have to coordinate this as well. And I think our colleagues in both the European Commission and the European Parliament play an important role in deciding this.
Okay, thank you, Annelien. We've got only a few minutes left. It was very interesting to talk with you about the liberal values during this pandemic. We've talked about well, the lack of preparedness in most European member states and the national reflexes at the beginning of the pandemic, but we've also seen strengthening European coordination and cooperation during the past few months, both on the healthcare issues, on strategic supplies for medicines, vaccination programs, etc. The importance of big data supporting our policies, fighting this pandemic, but also the main challenges on protecting the individual liberties and our privacy. To end this panel discussion, I would like to ask the three of you one final question, and please answer it shortly. What will be the one main lesson on liberal values you've learned over the past few months and you would like to share with our viewers? And I would like to start with Annelien first.
Oh, wow. Well, then no, let me end with a positive message. We are more important and very necessary than ever to protect and promote liberal values such as rule of law, democratic scrutiny, promoting public health, protecting and ensuring privacy. So I would say to all people also watching, keep up the good work.
Thank you. Veronique?
Something I would like to add is that the success of our health findings will also very much rely on trust. Trust from the citizens towards our measures. I don't believe in coercion. I believe in explanation. Trust in science. And we have a huge work to do on this misinformation and disinformation. In my country, the problem with vaccine is a terrible one. We have to show the people that using a digital application to trace is useful and respects their privacy. I do think that we will fully need the citizens, and what we call the Conference for the Future of Europe will be a way to show that we take the voice and the thoughts of the citizens into account. It is really a key factor of success to me.
Merci beaucoup. And finally, Philippe.
Well, I think that the pandemic shows that within a liberal democracy, with respect for fundamental values, you are able to fight a pandemic. You can do it. If you trust the science, if you trust the facts, if you base your policy based on those facts, it is possible to fight against this pandemic. Because the final comment, of course, is we are all liberals. And with liberals, we always say it's personal freedom. It's about personal freedom, yes. But with personal freedom also comes personal responsibility. And the only way that this pandemic is going to stop and the spread of the virus is going to stop is also by taking personal responsibility, following the rules, wearing the masks, following the hygiene rules, making sure that you narrow your contacts. That's a decision that every person, every individual has to make every day. And that's core liberalism, core liberal values that need to be implemented right now to stop this pandemic.
That's a very strong message, Philippe. Thank you very much for that. That's the end of this panel discussion. Once again, thank you, Veronique Trier-Lenoir, Philippe de Backer, and Annelien Bredenoord. And now back to you, Anita and Rogier.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Rob, and amazing how many topics you covered in just half an hour. And I think this is some very, very powerful messages at the end, and I think it's hopeful.
It's indeed very hopeful, a strong message for what we need to do, but definitely a dot on the horizon, I think, that we all have to keep in mind.
Yes, and we heard some, because these are professional politicians who gave their opinion. In a short while, we'll go to the fringe meetings where we're also going to hear, where everybody can participate in the discussion. What is needed from the average D66 member in these times to help us find these balances?
Well, I think it was said already. We have to take our own responsibility. We have to take care of the people around us. We have to abide by the rules, but we do it in a personal and how to say, free way. This should not be imposed, like, for instance, the vaccine discussion. But that doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. It means we have to take our own responsibility and be aware of it.
Yes, and there's so much expertise, I think, in your party that during the fringe meetings we can learn a lot from everybody. But before we go to that, we have something very special as an intermezzo. Shaila Shitalsing, does she need any introduction?
Well, indeed, I am personally very excited with the next item that's coming up. And indeed, I agree that she doesn't need an introduction. You must all know her or have heard of her. And she has been very sharp on these issues in the past weeks and months. And I suggest we just go and listen to her.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Shaila Shitalsing.
Ja, er is veel om je zorgen over te maken in crisistijd. Heel veel. Zo hadden we noodverordeningen die superburgemeesters plotseling absolute macht gaven over hun kudde. Zonder wettelijke basis, zonder democratische goedkeuring. Grondrechten bleken zomaar opzij te kunnen worden gezet, want je let even niet op en de overheid staat voor jou te bepalen wat je in je eigen huis mag doen, hoe je je bruiloft mag vieren en of je je schoonmoeder daarbij mag omhelzen. Of je loopt nietsvermoedend over het strand, zoals argeloze wandelaars dit voorjaar overkwam. En er vliegt een drone van de politie boven je hoofd en die heel hard afstand houden brult. Je let even niet op en Hugo de Jonge wil je een app opdringen voor op je telefoon om besmettingen op te sporen. Geheel vrijwillig uiteraard, geen druk. Maar even later staat je werkgever al naast je bureau om je dringend te adviseren de app te installeren. En het zou fijn zijn als je hem wilt laten zien voordat je de werkvloer betreedt. Je let even niet op en het blijkt dat het recht van je kinderen om naar school te gaan, het recht van vrouwen op bescherming tegen hun mishandelende echtgenoot, het recht van vluchtelingen om asiel te zoeken, allemaal ondergeschikt zijn gemaakt aan de coronabestrijding. Vrouwen moesten in lockdown met hun mishandelaar. Kinderen verdwenen van de radar van de online school. Voor vluchtelingen was het loket even dicht. En ja, dat is zorgelijk. Toch is in de loop van de coronacrisis gebleken dat de overheid, en ik beperk mij hier nadrukkelijk tot de Nederlandse overheid, zich hier bewust van is, zich laat bijsturen. Soms onwillig, soms met vertraging, maar toch door een volksvertegenwoordiging die signaleert, waarschuwt, ingrijpt, corrigeert. Het gevaar, dat zijn de anderen. De mensen om ons heen. Want je ziet hoe snel het kan gaan. Er is onzekerheid, er is angst, het duurt voort en dan begint het. De roep om harder ingrijpen die van onderop opstijgt. De roep om het opleggen van verboden en geboden aan de buurman, aan onszelf. Waardoor we in de paradoxale situatie konden belanden dat de Nederlandse premier zei: doe vooral een mondkapje op als je dat zelf zo belangrijk vindt. En de mensen terugloeiden: nee, verplicht het ons, gebied ons, sla ons, want we staan niet voor onszelf in. Stuur het leger op ons af, doe net zoals in China. Want ja, het is jammer van die Oeigoerse concentratiekampen en het is jammer dat Chinezen tot ver achter hun voordeur gevolgd worden door de staat. Maar ze hebben wel mooi het virus eronder gekregen. Net als de Vietnamezen trouwens. Tja, een eenpartijstaat niet ideaal, maar toch. Ook van onderop komen de aanvallen op de vrijheid van religie. Door burgers die, en ik zeg dit als ongelovigen, boos zijn. Omdat gelovigen wel naar de kerk mogen blijven gaan en wij niet naar het café. Kennelijk leven we al zo lang in vrede en vrijheid dat bij velen het besef is verdwenen dat de kerkgang voortvloeit uit een zwaar bevochten grondrecht. Het recht op gewetensvrijheid en op het in vrijheid mogen denken, voelen, geloven, lezen en uitdragen van ideeën. Dus ja, er is veel om je zorgen over te maken. En als u zich druk maakt over geschieper met grondrechten en over inbreuken op persoonlijke vrijheden en over liberale waarden onder druk en over de fragiliteit van de democratie, maak dan de borst maar nat. Want er komen nog veel grotere rampen aan. Corona is een zacht briesje in een warme zomernacht, een voetnoot in de geschiedenis, vergeleken met de klimaatramp die ons de komende decennia zal treffen. Als de democratische rechtsstaat krasjes dreigt op te lopen van een virus waar de meeste mensen niet dood aan gaan, en als veel van wat ons dierbaar is moet wijken voor de bestrijding ervan, bedenk dan eens hoe luid de roep om autocratie zal zijn wanneer het water komt. Wanneer de hittegolven verergeren, het ijs blijft smelten, de slagregens het land zullen gezelen, de bosbranden hoog zullen blijven oplaaien, de klimaatvluchtelingen in kolonnen hun verdroogde en onleefbaar geworden gebieden zullen verlaten. Vraag je af wat er dan gaat gebeuren met alles wat ons dierbaar is en of er dan nog tijd is voor nette mensen om op een zaterdag bij elkaar te komen om over liberale waarden in tijden van crisis te debatteren. Het klimaat, daar deden we toch van alles aan. Ja, maar niet genoeg, niet op tijd. En er zijn dingen in de wachtkamer gezet, want we hebben nu belangrijkere dingen aan ons hoofd, zoals corona. Logisch zou je denken, want er gaan nu mensen dood aan corona. Ga weg met je Green Deal, Frans Timmermans. Maar er sterven nu al jaarlijks honderdduizenden mensen aan klimaatverandering, aan hitte vooral en aan droogte. Aan luchtvervuiling sterven jaarlijks zelfs miljoenen mensen. Alleen staat het niet op hun overlijdensakte, komt door klimaatverandering. Dat er nu mensen doodgaan aan corona, komt mede doordat we jaren geleden niet hebben geluisterd naar waarschuwingen van experts die zeiden: kijk uit met zoonosen, we moeten de wijze waarop we dieren houden herzien. We luisterden niet naar experts die zeiden: het is niet de vraag of, maar de vraag wanneer een pandemie ons zal raken. Want dat was toen niet urgent. We hadden belangrijkere dingen aan ons hoofd. Zie de coronacrisis dus als een brandoefening, waarbij de vraag niet is hoe houden we liberale waarden overeind in coronatijd, maar hoe maken we ze toekomstbestendig voor de nog veel grotere crisis die zullen komen.
Wow, give her 5 minutes and she turns everything upside down. I'm not sure if this is a hopeful introduction to the French meetings or just a powerful one.
Well, I'm an optimistic person, so I go for the powerful one. But powerful indeed it was. Huh?
Yes, okay, so we are now going to the French meetings. That means we are going to put YouTube aside for a while. Don't close it, because we're going to come back for the plenary closing. But we're going to switch to Zoom. How do I find the right Zoom meeting for the right French meeting I want to attend?
Yes, indeed. That's what we're going to do now. It's very easy. As Rogier said, no need to close your YouTube. Just put it aside for a while because it stays open on our end as well. And if you want to join a French meeting at this point, please use the Zoom link that you have received through your email or that you could also find on the website of D66 Belgium Luxembourg. As soon as you activate this link, you log on to Zoom, you will get this image, which you see now on the screen. Look for this little icon. On some screens it will be below. On some screens, depending on whether you use a laptop or a tablet, it will be on top. You click on this little icon and you will come into a screen where you will be able to choose the French meeting that you would like to attend. Everybody has registered beforehand, or most of you probably have registered for these meetings, but this is not an obligation. If you want to change your mind and you prefer to go to another meeting, please feel free to do that.
Yes, and at 10 to 4, we're going to come back here, so you have to go back to YouTube and click the YouTube link, and the stream will continue with the double interview with Malmström and Sigrid Kaag. And of course the keynote speech of Sigrid Kaag and the announcement of the winner of the pub quiz. 3 very important items in today's program.
Exactly, so don't forget to come back after your French meeting and join the YouTube stream again.
Yes, have fun in your French meeting and see you back at 10 to 4.
Ja, want hij is hartstikke mooi, maar je ziet het niet inderdaad.
Dear people, welcome back here in Brussels. Where Anita was, there is now Annelou van Egmond. You're the Vice President of ALDE. You were responsible for the campaign last year for the European elections. You do a lot more in ALDE. ALDE Renew, so there's the Renew group in the European Parliament. There's ALDE, that's the umbrella organization of European liberal parties. What again is the difference between the two?
Well, ALDE is an organization of parties in Europe who are either liberal or democratic, or liberal democrats or social liberals, and not just parties in countries in the EU. There's also a lot of member parties who are actually in countries that are part of Europe but not part of the EU. But all the parties that are member of ALDE who are situated in the EU also contribute to the Renew group.
Okay, so that's it's bigger but also smaller. As a vice president, what do you do on a daily basis?
Basically, you can do anything you want, but the topics that I am working on right now are, for instance, the European Women's Academy, a very important training that we have developed over the years for future female political leaders in Europe. We're doing incredibly well. We have alumni who have been ministers, who have become members of the European Parliament, members of their own parliament. And another thing, I am also a rapporteur on Estonia.
Yes. And that I'm one of the few men on the stage today, and most of the politicians on stage today are powerful women. There's Sophie, there's Sigrid, there's you, there's Anita. Is that a coincidence?
I don't think so.
What is your secret?
You know, we're really good at what we do.
But does the liberal parties attract powerful women, or do liberal parties create powerful women?
I would hope both. The European Women's Academy is actually one of these efforts to see that there's women who are active in a political party, but who somehow are running against this sort of problem where they can't promote, they can't get into the senior levels, and that's one of the things we want to do, because there's. When you look at the entry level, there's plenty of women, but then when you go up, we see that the number of men increases and the number of women decreases.
Yes. When we talk about the senior level, the two women you're going to interview today, well, I think for members of D66, they barely need an introduction. But Cecilia Malmström, how important is she?
She's a powerhouse. She's been a cabinet minister in her own country, in Sweden. She was a European Commissioner, first for Home Affairs and later for Trade. And presently, she's actually in the running to become the Secretary General for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development.
Yeah. And Sigrid Kaag, they're here.
Yeah.
Sigrid Kaag, we know she's the newly elected leader of D66. Still, congratulations. Remind us, what is her international state of affairs?
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes because, again, another powerhouse. She was a diplomat for many, many years, and in the end, an Undersecretary General for the United Nations, and she oversaw that, in that capacity, the detection and the destruction of chemical weapons in Syria.
Okay. Well, you're going to interview them. What do you want to know from them?
Well, you know, they have a lot in common, but today we're going to talk about trade mostly, and trade in relationship to Corona.
Okay, Annelou, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Of course, I'm going to start with Cecilia because she's our guest, and one of the things you have been fighting for is multilateral cooperation when it comes to trade. Here in these days of Corona, we see that there's a fight for anything that's available around the world, and many countries would be tempted to go it alone. And maybe you could tell us why it's still so very important to work with multilateral cooperation in international trade.
Well, hello, Annelou and everybody. It's an honor to be with you today, this afternoon from Sweden. Well, we have seen, and it actually started before the COVID crisis, an increased nationalism, protectionism, closing of border, and an erosion of multilateralism and the liberal world order that we created, the Europeans and the Americans, after the Second World War. And that is very damaging. And we need to repair that, and especially in trade, where WTO has lost its importance and has had difficulties making decisions, showing its role in a world where we are trading in a different way as we did in 25 years ago. This needs to be repaired. I know that Europe and many other allies are really trying to push there, but of course, without the engagement of the US and China, who are violating the rules of WTO, it would be very hard to repair. But hopefully there will soon be a new Secretary General, a woman, because there are two women in the last race, and that's a good thing. And together with constructive countries, Europe and other like-minded and allies, can start reforming and showing that WTO is still up to it. Because closing borders, protectionism, isolation will not do. And I think this crisis has shown that more than ever.
Yeah, definitely. Sigrid, one of the pillars on the liberalism is free trade. And how do we prevent this focus on free trade to sort of raise the prices of everything that we're scrambling for all around the world? How do we still keep it open and fair?
Yeah, well, I think, yes, there's often been a confusion when you speak about free trade. For D66, and certainly myself, we are always talking about free, inclusive, and fair trade. And that's very different. That means we're not talking about a race to the... Oops. We're talking about quality. We're talking fair labor conditions, fair and living wage for those who produce it, safe labor conditions, and value through the entire chain. This is what international, open, free, fair, inclusive trade is supposed to be about. And as Europe, we need to be standard bearers and standard setters. This is why, from my perspective, future trade agreements, certainly, but also CETA, offer that bridge to be both a political champion, to set standards, to help apply them, use the WTO as a forum through which we sort of set the rules, but from a European Union and trade agreements, we can actually lever the change. And the corona crisis actually offers this tremendous strategic opportunity, as it is, in crisis, to reset the way we produce, how we consume, but also really engage and ensure that responsible business conduct becomes the norm and not the deviation. And this is different from excluding businesses or other shareholders from the conversation. They have a responsibility, they need to live up to it, but we need to provide the platform and set the standard. So there's a tremendous opportunity to work differently. The anxiety around corona and trade, and of course the disruption in the supply chains, certainly from the start, and the lack of availability of important commodities such as personal protective equipment, the PPE, or medicine, has also demonstrated we've become too dependent on one or two source countries, be it China or India. We need to strategically reorient ourselves. And again, here we can only do this effectively at a European level. The nationalist agenda that Cecilia rightly put away, the populist agenda, pretending as if we can go it alone, solve it at a national level, is just absolutely ludicrous. But we need to demonstrate at a European level we're fit for purpose, we've got the direction, and we have the vision and the investments to make this happen. This is not going to be happening overnight, but we need to declare it and have the political will. And I think there is a lot being garnered or organized around this. We are certainly willing, I am willing for D66 with other social liberal parties to be really front runners in this, and we already are, but we need to make sure we bring others along and do not allow them to fall back on a conservative reflex, which is a normal nature of mankind sometimes, particularly in crisis. Protect as opposed to protect, but open and strengthen.
Yeah, but working together and discussing these things and coming to a set standard, that takes a lot of time. Do we have this time in Corona days when we are, we can't wait for a vaccine, or we can't wait for solutions, and discussing on a multilateral level takes forever. I could understand how people could become sort of anxious that we don't have time for this right now. Cecilia, how do you feel about that?
Well, what's the alternative? I mean, the alternative is that everybody focus on itself, and that can be like a very short-term solution, but it's not sustainable. And I fully agree with what Sigrid said on the beginning of this crisis, when there was a shortage of critical equipment. But overall, during this crisis, we have had food in our stores, we've had equipment, global value chains have worked. And what we need to do now is to make sure that we perfectionize them, and many companies have already started to diversify a little bit their value chains and to seek more flexibility. And that is a logical thing to do. And that has happened since many months already, and that will continue as well. Europe, of course, needs to look after its own house, but that does not mean closing Europe. We still need to trade, we still need to engage, we still need to keep on working on the reforming the multilateral rules with others. And here we can only hope that in a couple of weeks there will be a more constructive transatlantic cooperation on this, so that we can really sit together and see how can we modernize institutions. WHO is the most urgent, but plenty others of them, T7, G20, they haven't worked either during the crisis. So there is a momentum where we can really see that, okay, how can we do better in the future? Because there would be a new pandemic or a new crisis.
Yeah. Sigrid, you mentioned the shortage of PPE, the shortage of medicine, and the fact that we have been very much relying on either China or India for many of these articles. Is there a role for the EU to start producing this amongst ourselves, and how to make sure that if, say, one of our EU members is going to produce these goods, that it's going to be available for everybody?
Well, there are two levels in a way. Usually from a good crisis management, one knows one is always ready for the next, one is ready for today's crisis sort of in future, but the next crisis will not be the same. So that's sort of pandemic lesson, sadly, not 101. And therefore we need to work on contingencies. And yes, we need to have strategic autonomy in terms of goods such as PPE, but not only. Maybe a future virus will have a totally different impact, and we need different materials. So you can't just linearly plan. But strategic autonomy, having certain sectors strengthened again to be able to produce in key areas is important, and we're working towards that. However, the next step is, as Cecilia mentioned, that we keep supply chains open, that we have international agreement on public goods. Healthcare, access to vaccines, medicine is a global public good. We have the WHO, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. These are agreements we've entered into, organizations and agreements. We need to make sure precisely to work internationally and multilaterally that we can build to have availability for all. This requires knowledge sharing, which has happened in this pandemic through research around the vaccine, commodity sharing, and solidarity. This is not a cheap slogan. Solidarity is a political choice. It's a matter of investing in the stability and safety of others. Europe at the start, at the forefront, but with others. So I don't think it's an either or. And yes, we are investing, allowing certain companies in certain sectors to sort of build up again, but you can't work towards a total reorientation of the global economy. This is neither workable, not realistic, and you cause more harm than good. What we need to do is what I mentioned before, is focus on quality, availability, and value in the chain. And this requires, again, international cooperation. And I agree with Cecilia. I remember from all her long discussions and flights she had to make to DC, very arduous, sometimes only incremental progress, but multilateralism is not a luxury. It's actually essential, particularly in these volatile times. It's the only way we can survive, and we can actually come out of this stronger and differently.
Yeah. Cecilia, you mentioned you in sort of an optimistic way that who knows, maybe in a couple of weeks there will be a new political leader in the US. But is there also a scenario for where we have to face the same political leader for the next couple of years? And what does that mean for international trade?
Well, obviously, it's the American people choosing their presidents, and whoever it is, we have to work with that person and that administration. It could be easier in some regards with one and easier with others. But we have to plan for two scenarios, and I hope that the EU is doing that right now. And we need to sort of to start identifying concrete areas where we can rebuild that trust that has been quite hurt the last year, and see what can we do to facilitate trade between us. It could be quite technical, but still it's a good thing for business on both sides. We can also work with, there's so many other Americans outside the White House where we can start building, and I know that there's immense work going on the Sustainable Development Goals, working with states in the US. There are lots of people in the Congress, in academia, in business, in the states, as I said, who want to work with Europe. And we need to sort of try to formulate a positive agenda, maybe limited to start with, but to slowly build up that trust. Of course, we would love the Americans to work with us to reform international organizations such as the WHO, and to be, see Europe as a friend and an ally. We used to be. We don't always agree with the Americans, of course not. But basically, we are friends and allies, and I think these last years have been painful in many ways. So hopefully we can find a way out of this. But we need to make sure that the European Union acts in a united way, so that they can't pick and choose, because that has hurt our relations with the US and also with China.
Okay, well, I'm so sorry to say, but we have come already to the end of this. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours on this topic, but I would really want to thank you both for joining us, be it online, and for sharing your knowledge with us on this important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
yes.
And good luck.
Thank you so much, Sigrid Kaag and Cecilia Malmström, and also Annelou, thank you so much. Anita, we're almost coming to the end, but we're going to, I think, maybe your favorite part of the day, the speech of Sigrid Kaag. I know that you're quite kind of a fan. How lucky or how happy are you that the leadership of D66 with Sophie, who is, I think, seen as the emperor of privacy in the European Parliament, and Sigrid Kaag, who has such an international state of affairs, that you are going into the national elections next year with such a European-minded leadership?
Well, that's of course fantastic to my mind. I think this is probably the only way in which we will be able to advance in this area. I know that Sigrid, right from the start, indicated how high a priority she gives to Europe and in general to international thinking and acting, and I am very optimistic on what her vision on Europe will bring.
Yeah, because basically that is the whole question you ask her. Give a keynote on your vision of Europe in these times of pandemic. That's a broad topic.
It's a very broad topic, but I trust fully that Sigrid will share with us very broad thoughts as well, and that she will explain what new leadership will also mean for Europe.
Okay, then I would say, without further ado, let's listen to the keynote of the current Minister of Trade, but the leader of D66, Sigrid Kaag.
Well, thank you very much, dear friends. I certainly wish I were with you right now and that we could physically meet. And I wish we could physically speak to each other without, of course, any of the necessary social distancing. To be in a fully packed room, to see each other, to debate, discuss all the new ideas, and really to inspire one another, because it's team, exchange, in mutual respect, which makes all the difference. And we know it cannot be so. We don't know for how long. The COVID crisis has, of course, impacted our lives in countless ways, big and small, in abstract and concrete terms, between lifelong friends and between people on entirely opposite sides of the planet, all impacted by this very one virus. We in Europe were doing, at least in some ways, fine, certainly also in the Netherlands. And suddenly we are reminded of our own fragility, unexpectedly. Suddenly, many of us are suffering, hit by anxiety, and certainly the uncertainty of not knowing what and how long, and what the future will hold. And it will probably take us a while to really see and appreciate the ways in which COVID has affected us, but hopefully also has opened new windows of our mind for the now and the future. And as United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said, Corona is not only a wake-up call, it's a dress rehearsal for the world of challenges to come. We need to let that sink in, because I think he is fundamentally right. The pandemic has, of course, exacerbated many long-standing inequalities. We've seen this also in the Netherlands, across Europe, but also globally. Whether you look at it from a viewpoint of wealth to gender, it's exposed global fragilities. It's impacted our efforts globally to eradicate hunger, poverty, or gender inequality in many ways we thought unimaginable. The development clock has been reset by a decade or more. So yes, in many ways, we seem to be doing fine before COVID hit us, or at least for some, global trends were positive, beyond positive. But in fundamental ways, it was never as positive as we allowed ourselves to think. Sure, economic growth had lifted millions out of poverty. But is it fair that the wealth of the richest 1% has increased twice as fast as that of the bottom 50%? Indeed, life expectancy was climbing, but is it good that life expectancy in the Central African Republic is now still only at 52 years, while it's 84 years in Japan? And is it justifiable in our century that 70 million people are fleeing conflict, hunger, war, or are internally displaced because of it? Is it desirable that our children and grandchildren inherit a planet in which ecosystems have been so damaged that the extinction of species are now real and irreversible, and that actually many species will become unrecognizable? On top of all of this, democracy, where it was well established, is under pressure almost everywhere on our planet. The rule of law is in decline. Free elections, minority rights, freedom of the press, freedom of expression, they're all under constant attack and threat. We, social liberals, did not and will never accept this. Our worldview, our view for our country, Europe and the world is very different. So what are we to do in this particular situation, at that historic moment? On the whole, we know what we have to do. In Europe, for Europe, and with Europe. First and foremost, climate change. We simply have to step up our game to save the planet, and in a way to save mankind, of course. The European Green Deal is an important blueprint for that much needed transformation. D66 is and will be its staunchest ally. If we are not the first climate neutral continent by 2050, who can we count on? Who will lead the way? But it will not be attained by looking at the status quo. And as I said, we need to step up our game in crisis more than ever before. Now is not the time to fall back on the natural reflex to do less because it's difficult. No, we need to do more because it's difficult. And the European Commission is proposing to increase the 2030 target for emission reductions to at least 55%, which is fantastic. It's important. And if we lead and others follow, we will keep up a warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, if we're lucky, if we act in time and we mobilize and demonstrate that we have the political will to do so. We also need to strengthen and modernize our European economy. Our panel on trade was just a snippet on this. And this also means, and it almost seems embarrassing to say so, or that you have to stress it, we need to hold on to the euro. Yes, we still need to underline this. Even after the economic crisis of 2008, there are still those who fantasize openly about bringing back the guilder. I'm almost reminded of the florin. And even after Brexit, there is some talk in Dutch politics of an exit. Both would, of course, be utterly flawed, irresponsible, and for D66, both are totally non-negotiable. We need a stronger, effective, and inclusive Europe, including an economic Europe, an internal market that is vibrant, that is modern, that looks towards the future, that is green. But we do not need a departure from our base. The pandemic has already hit our economy very hard, and the ability to recover is far equal across our member states. In that way, the crisis has only reinforced the challenges to our economic and monetary union. Member states, of course, will never be exactly the same. This is also the beauty in our divergence. But disproportional divergence in productivity growth, competitiveness, and per capita income is a threat to all of us. It's always about the weakest link in the chain. It undermines European integration and cooperation, and it also undermines the strength and stability of the so-called stronger member states. I think all of us remember from our youth the very important sayings that it's up to the ones who are with the strongest shoulders to carry the heaviest load. If we want a strong, well-functioning and sustainable Europe that will definitely work and deliver for all of us, we must do what it takes and obviously invest to harmonize our economic policies to make the difference. We also need to invest in sustainable economic growth and accept that sometimes we need to support Athens more for all of us to also thrive in an equitable manner in Amsterdam. We don't do this for the economy in the abstract. We do this for our fellow European citizens, for our stability, for our shared prosperity. The European Union does not exist for the economy or the stock market or the treaties or the institutions alone, or for the glory of, say, Jean Monnet or Jacques Delors. It's always there for the people, and it should be there for the people to count on. So we have to ensure that Europe is a place for everyone, where the rule of law works for everyone. There cannot be a Europe that speaks of LGBT-free zones. There cannot be a Europe where we allow or look away from the rise in anti-Semitic abuse and violence. We need to take this deadly seriously. Xenophobic and racist attacks against minorities cannot be met with anything less than the full force of the law and our opposing voices of reason and respect, a viable alternative. The rule of law helps to protect people from those in power and those in majority. It guarantees our most basic rights and freedoms, and it works through our institutions. Institutional checks and balances are, of course, at the heart of the rule of law. That means good governance. It seems something that one thought was only for countries far away, but we need to be reminded of the importance of good governance, inclusive governance, acceptable and easily accessible to citizens. A separation of powers in which the judiciary, of course, remains independent from the executive branch. As of today, this fundamentally important concept is under threat. Judges and prosecutors are persecuted. They're threatened. Their base and level of respect is eroded, very often from the top. And I therefore support linking the fundamental issues pertaining to the rule of law to all budgetary matters in Europe, if all else fails. Some would think it unwise, but it would make European values negotiable if we act otherwise. I would actually tackle the problem from the other end. If we ask solidarity from taxpayers, from countries, from fellow member states, if we ask their trust, we have to be able to say to people, we will protect your investments, your hard-earned money from wastage, not only, but also inappropriate use or wrongful allocation or abuse. We will not, through your hard-earned money, facilitate pain or harm or an erosion of the strength of the European Union, of our value community. It may be difficult, but in the end, it is something we need to keep re-embracing over and over again, because as we've seen over the last years, it is sadly needed. Then there's a Europe on the world stage. The policy changes or the political challenges are, of course, numerous. The world has never been a quiet place, never ever. The European Union has been a harbor of peace, tranquility, and prosperity. But if we look around us, starting by the illegal annexation of the Crimea in 2014, as one of the most serious breaches of European borders since World War II. With Brexit, for the first time, the European partnership lost a member, an important member, a Security Council member. Strains in the transatlantic relationship are not uniquely tied to the current US administration. So a truly common foreign and security policy is necessary. It's not a luxury, it's not a folly, it's a much needed choice. And you've probably heard the quip against the background of the first Gulf War. Then Belgian Foreign Minister Mark Eyskens described Europe as an economic giant, a political dwarf, and a military worm. He was exaggerating, of course, But as we've come a long way since 1990, but the sentiment somewhat still rings true. If we are truly an externally oriented normative power, which we aspire to be, built on peace, democracy, open markets, and of course, always human rights, we need to behave and become exactly that, also in the world, an externally oriented normative powerhouse, built on peace, democracy, open markets, and human rights. We cannot be anything less. And such a union has to be a union that's able to defend itself, not for the sake of power or military might, but for the protection of democratic principles and the promotion of peace, stability, and shared prosperity, internally and abroad. This means integration, integration, integration. For this, of course, Brexit was a bad sign, not only because one of the largest contributors to the EU budget left, and the reflex may have been to wait and see and first choose for oneself. No, Brexit was a bad sign because it slightly opened the door for the doubters, the eroders. We do not want Brexit to have some of its intended effects. No, the response to Brexit needs to be further cooperation, further integration, demonstrate how a strong Europe can act, choose, and lead the way. This was also the case when we look at foreign policy and defense integration. We need to remain fiercely international and proudly multilateral. We need to hold and true to values. Globalization, of course, is under pressure. We've seen the negative impact of a globalization that went way too far, particularly on the imbalances on wealth, the inequities that have been reinforced through trade unhinged. But it's also vulnerabilities and risks that I recognize. But I oppose those voices that warn against international cooperation, against international trade, to advocate for what they've always actually advocated and stood for: more nationalism, more self-sufficiency, and ultimately protectionism. And we know where that leads. And surely we need to mitigate, we need to address and redirect the vulnerabilities and risks of globalization. That's very clear. Through sustainability, through investment, through international cooperation that is value-based, results-oriented, and always inclusive, to raise the bar for all. So we do not need to throw away the baby with the bathwater. But the best moments in our history is when we embrace an open society that is daring and bold and looks into the future. There have been many times when the Netherlands was really at the forefront internationally. And only with this international outlook within Europe and outside of Europe can we meet global challenges. They demand international cooperation. They demand a different worldview. How do we achieve all of this? We need to make the bold and obvious choices. We need to have the political guts to stand for them. We need to be pro-European, not only when we're in Europe, we need to be pro-European from The Hague. There can only be one voice, one and only voice, and always the same. Because we are at a crossroads in Europe. Will we set undeliverable targets to cut migration from countries whose citizens have a right to live and work in our humble corner of the Union? Is that suddenly on the agenda? No. Will we co-opt the language and policies of nationalists in our governing agreements? I surely hope not. Will we continue to duck when they take siege at our tradition of Europeanism? A firm no. Will we, in short, allow ourselves to sleepwalk onto Britain's path to the door, even if it's the back door? I propose we answer all these questions in a forthright manner, a firm manner. It's of course a no, but we will present the viable alternative. Fact-based, policy-oriented, but ultimately persuading all citizens that they see the future can be very different if we dare to go that way. And if we look to the Netherlands, I also look at, for instance, Slovakia, where President Zuzana Kaputova is fighting for the rule of law, at home as well as in the EU. We see a new government in Belgium with Alexander De Croo of the Open VLD at the helm. In France, President Macron has spent many years setting up a new framework for the EU to break the political deadlock, as he called it, in holding Europe back from the world stage. We need to be with that wave. And of course, we always enjoy and admire and are grateful for the leadership resolve that is so much needed in times of crisis and doubt by Angela Merkel. The clarity of thought she provides, choice, the daring of choice, and empathy and kindness is one road to travel. So I would say, as the Netherlands, let's become again one of those European frontrunners. Let's shy away from the doubting. Let's dare to lead. And let's all aspire to take on that traditional role we used to play in the past. You do not have to be the largest. It's the conviction of our ideas and our choices that can inspire. To help Europe become the Europe we wish to see. To build the Europe we wish to build. And I realize it's never done in one day, nor in 1,000 days. But if there was ever a place to start this quest, it's now, in the midst of the corona crisis, in the midst of a turbulent world. It's now the moment for Europe to be there, to be counted on. We need to work for progress. Progress never comes easy. We need to fight for it, but we'll never give up in the face of adversity. That would be too easy. Persistence is the belief that we can make our union, as it can be, ever closer, for its citizens and to its citizens. For a better tomorrow, vote D66. Thank you.
Wow, that was a speech.
Indeed, indeed, yes.
I rest my case. So we are coming to the end of this Congress, to the end of this exciting afternoon. And it's the honor for Sophie and myself to do the wrap-up. Maybe we have just 1 or 2 minutes. Sophie, did you enjoy yourself this afternoon? Were there any parts you would like to highlight? Was it one big highlight?
Well, let's start by saying that after all the considerable stress of the last couple of days on whether or not this was going to work, yes, I had a very, very enjoyable afternoon, but that was in particular because of what I take away from it. And I come away from this with a feeling of hope. I feel energized. I was in the session together with my Hungarian and my Italian colleague about, Europe, disunity or unity, and I think the conclusion was clear: unity, optimism. And I think it is important because these days we all have a tendency to despair a little bit. We see the contamination of the virus going up, measures that are taken that are impacting our lives, our daily lives, and we don't know where it's going. People are afraid, people are depressed, and I think it's very important that we get hope from something. I get hope from the fact that there's so many people who have connected and that I feel embedded in a liberal family, but also in a European family. And I know it sounds like the slogan of a football club, but united we stand, united we are stronger. It is a very simple truth. And the bigger the challenges are and the bigger the threats are, the bigger the need to hang together. And that's why, I was listening to the speech of our leader, Sigrid Kaag, and that gives me a lot of hope. It is the right message. It's a courageous message. And we just heard the
church bell
church bells
here in Brussels.
And
yes.
that reminds us that's the church of St. Catherine, and we are in Brussels. So it's good for people to realize that. So I come away from this with a feeling of hope, and also finally the fact that we are in a completely different era, and we're trying to find our way, also trying to find out how we can connect, even if we cannot meet one-on-one. And the fact that we are finding new ways, that this event succeeded, that we managed to connect, that also gives me a lot of hope. And this is only the start. This is only an experiment. This is going to be big. So I would like to ask you to thank everybody also on my behalf, because I think big thanks are in order. I would like to thank everybody who has tuned in today or who's going to watch this later on. I would like to thank all the speakers. The effort has been immense. I enjoyed it a lot. So thank you all very much and hope to see you next year in Brussels live.
Thank you so much for these words, Sophie. And I entirely share what you said about this importance of connecting now more than ever. And I think with all of us here and everybody who helped to realize this event, we made a big effort in doing exactly that. In spite of all the restrictions, in spite of the difficulties, we found a way to connect. And we hope that everybody who's watching us from home feels this connection as well, and that we will build on this. I'm not going to be long because I think we've said it for today. I just want to extend a big thank you to everybody who helped build this event from the start. It has been from time to time really hard on the brain because we had to invent and reinvent. But I think with all the contributions from the delegation, from the chapter Belgium-Luxembourg, from the colleagues of the National Bureau, from the technicians that have been supporting us all day long. And maybe I would just like to mention one person, and that's Wietse, who has really played a huge role in making this technically happen. So thank you so much, and thank all the participants. Thank you, Sophie, because you have played a huge role in getting this fantastic program together. And then I have
you were the leader, Anita.
Yeah, well,
big hand to you.
You were driving as well. So I have one more thing to share with you, and this is to tell you who won last night's pub quiz. You must have forgotten about it, but so third came for the pub quiz, Sophie. Yes. Second, Lieke van Beers. And first, Paul Breitbart. He won the pub quiz.
Go, Paul.
Present is being sent to him. It's, I think it's a voucher for a book and a European flag. And it will be coming to you, Paul. And thank you so much for joining us yesterday in the pub quiz. So, last thing, see you next year. See you in Brussels.
We are in Brussels. Here you go. Here's to Europe, here's to hope, here's to the future.
Hey.